Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Lucy Tassell.
I'm Sam Koslowski.
Over the weekend, an agent from the US agency ICE shot and killed a nurse at a hospital in the city of Minneapolis. It is the second time this month that an ICE agent has killed a Minneapolis resident, causing significant public outcry and raising questions about how and why this government agency is killing US citizens on the street in broad daylight. In today's episode, we'll explain what ICE is, why its agents are in Minneapolis, and what to know about these two killings.
Lucy, this is actually the second time that the TDA team has come into the podcast studio to record a podcast about ICE agents shooting a civilian in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Mm-hmm. That's, of course, because earlier this month we saw an ICE agent killing 37-year-old mother of three, Renee Good, in her car in downtown Minneapolis, shooting her in the head. Now we've seen over the weekend an ICE agent killing a nurse, Alex Pretti. I have a lot of questions, but I think the one that I've noticed coming up a lot with my friends has been actually what ICE is.
So ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It's a federal agency and its key responsibility is to enforce immigration laws inside the United States. So you can kind of think of them as similar to the DOJ is involved in taking people to court, the government is involved in setting the laws, and police are involved in enforcing the laws. ICE is sort of like the police, but for immigration. Its responsibilities include things like arresting and deporting people who are in the country illegally. ICE was created after the September 11 attacks, but it has really come to prominence, I would say, since US President Donald Trump returned to office a year ago. Since then, ICE has been conducting what it calls, quote, targeted enforcement operations in cities across the country. The federal government says these operations are focused on people who have criminal records or outstanding deportation orders. Critics, however, would say these raids are actually broader than that and are creating fear in migrant communities.
Right.
And there have also been many images taken by press photographers, particularly I would say in the last 2 weeks, of people who are US citizens being taken into custody, or people who might not be US citizens but who don't have criminal records, like, for example, a photo we actually posted on the TDA feed last week, which was of 5-year-old Liam Ramos, who was arriving home from preschool in Minneapolis when ICE officers arrested him and his father in their driveway. The US Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, which oversees ICE, said Liam's father, an Ecuadorian migrant, fled from ICE during a targeted operation. And in a post to X, it said, ICE did not target a child, the child was abandoned.
So I think the really hard thing to kind of get your head around when talking about ICE is that they've got some powers that police traditionally do have, like an arrest, for example, but the scope is a lot narrower.
Yeah.
So you said before that arrest was in Minneapolis. What can you tell me about the city itself and ICE's activities there?
Minneapolis is a major city in Minnesota. That's one of the northernmost US states. It's one of the twin cities with St. Paul, and it's the birthplace and home of Prince. I would say that's probably what it's most famous for.
And for being very cold.
I actually have been to Minneapolis.
Wow.
It was about 15 years ago. It was in the summer and it was beautiful and vibrant and very green, not like now when it's covered in snow. It's also the same city where police officer Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd in 2020. And we've talked about that a few times on this podcast.
Kind of the trigger of the Black Lives Matter movement in the US.
Yeah, of the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, definitely. The city has a pretty sizable migrant population. Estimates peg it at around 1 in 10 residents of the city. One of the largest groups is from Somalia, and the Somalian population is actually big enough that Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, who we'll hear more from as this episode goes on, who is a white Jewish guy, has actually given multiple speeches in Somali.
Wow.
Late last year, ICE deployed 2,000 agents to Minneapolis. It said this was to carry out the, quote, largest immigration operation ever. The agency is calling it Operation Metro Surge. It posted a video to X on the 30th of December with a caption saying it was, quote, boots on the ground investigating suspected fraud sites.
Okay, so by fraud, they mean people in America illegally.
That's what they say, yes.
Okay.
And so In the second week of January, the second week of ICE having a, quote, boots on the ground presence in Minneapolis, we have the killing of Renee Good, a mother of 3 and a US citizen.
So Minneapolis wasn't necessarily the first city that ICE had conducted this sort of operation in the US.
Yeah.
This was happening in a couple of cities last year.
Yeah.
They get to Minneapolis, and within the first week, there's this death.
Yeah.
We've recorded an episode about Renee Good, but why don't you give us a quick recap, just so we can kind of place it in the puzzle?
Hi, I'm Zara. I'm the co-founder of the Daily Aus, and we started this company because we think news can be done differently. If you agree, you can hit subscribe. It's the best way to help us grow. Now, back to the video.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, second week of January, very early on in ICE's presence there, footage appears to show an ICE officer approaching Renee Good's car, which was stopped in the middle of a road in a neighborhood south of downtown Minneapolis. The officer demanded that Renee Good open the door and grabbed the handle. The vehicle then begins to roll forward, and a different ICE officer standing in front of it pulls his weapon and immediately fires at least 2 shots at close range into Good's head and body. And again, for more on that story and the reaction to it, you can go back and listen to our podcast on it from earlier this year.
So basically, to recap,
Yeah.
ICE is in Minneapolis in a large-scale operation. They're seen deporting people from their homes. And now, over the weekend, ICE agents have killed another person.
Yeah.
That brings us to the main point of today's podcast. Tell me what happened over the weekend.
So on Saturday, local time, local authorities responded to reports of a shooting involving ICE agents during a, quote, targeted operation in Minneapolis. The Department of Homeland Security has alleged that during this operation, 37-year-old Alex Pretti approached agents with a gun. That's their allegation. Video shows Pretti holding a phone. It also shows an agent appearing to pull a gun from Pretti's body later on, but
Okay.
to start with, the agency alleged that as agents attempted to disarm Pretti, he, quote, violently resisted arrest, leading to an agent firing, quote, defensive shots. Now, in videos captured by bystanders, you can see a group of masked agents grabbing Pretti, spraying something in his face, pushing him to the ground, removing that gun, as I've said. And then once agents were holding Pretti down, investigators say at least 2 agents shot him several times in quick succession. So you can see that in multiple videos of the incident. It's kind of hard to tell how many, but you can certainly hear a number of shots ringing out in very, very quick succession. Emergency services attempted to treat Pretti at the scene. He was later pronounced dead. Now, just about Pretti, who is a US citizen with no criminal history and a legal permit to carry a gun.
Got it.
He worked as an ICU nurse at a medical center for US Army veterans.
So the DHS is saying ICE officers were acting in self-defense, but video shows Pretti holding a phone.
Yeah.
I have to call out as well the journalistic work of Reuters, the Newswire agency. They were kind of the first after this incident to give fact-checked video that they could geolocate and verify.
Yeah.
And I guess that means that we have a federal perspective on this killing, which is at this stage at odds with what the video is showing us.
Yeah.
What has the response been to all of this at the state and local level?
So Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, who I mentioned earlier, he's called for US President Donald Trump to end the, quote, invasion of these heavily armed masked agents roaming the streets, emboldened with a sense of impunity. And he's formally requested assistance from the National Guard, that's like a reserve military force, to support the city's, quote, limited number of officers. And Minnesota Governor Tim Walz,
who we know from being the vice presidential candidate for Kamala Harris.
Exactly. He's called on the Trump administration to let the state lead the investigation into Pretti's killing. He called it, quote, organized brutality, and said the state's justice system, quote, must have the last word. In service of that, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, so basically just local authorities, has been granted a temporary restraining order to stop federal agents from, quote, altering or destroying any evidence connected to this weekend's shooting.
Right.
And we've also heard from former President Barack Obama, who has accused Trump of failing to impose, quote, discipline and accountability over his agents, saying they are employing, quote, unprecedented tactics.
So it sounds like there's a bit of a battle now between law enforcement agencies and federal agencies from different parts of the government, but at the heart of this story is an individual.
Yes.
Have we heard anything from Pretti's family?
In a statement given to media on Sunday, his parents Michael and Susan called him a, quote, kind-hearted soul who cared deeply for his family and friends, and also the American veterans whom he cared for as an ICU nurse. They said he wanted to make a difference, but unfortunately will not be with us to see his impact.
And then late yesterday, we also had a statement that was released from two former presidents, Barack Obama, who you mentioned before, in connection with Bill Clinton, both calling for the immediate halting of the ICE operation in Minnesota as well.
Yes.
Lucy, thank you for taking us through this. I'm sure it will not be the last time that we discuss these ICE operations on the podcast. And thank you for joining us for this Tuesday morning. We'll be back this afternoon with some headlines. Until then, have a beautiful day.